The results are in. Trudeau wins the election and will form a minority government. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Justin Trudeau hangs on to earn a second term as Canada's Prime Minister. Based on the polling data, it was clearly going to be a minority Liberal or minority Conservative government, and it seemed like this year the cards favor the Liberals. Today I want to dive a little bit deeper into the election numbers and possibly talk about where Canada is going to be heading in the future. So, without further ado, here's how these seats broke down. There was 338 up for grabs, and the Liberals were able to capture 157. That's a little bit shy of the magic majority number of 170. In second place was the Conservatives. They were able to capture 121 seats, and that's a pretty big discrepancy between first and second. That's not what the polls indicated, but I'm going to touch more on that in a second. In third place, it was not the NDP actually. Third place came the Bloc Québécois with 32 seats. That was pretty surprising. In fourth, it was the NDP. They only captured 24. Then after that, you have the Green Party with 3. There was 1 independent, and Maxime Bernier's People's Party of Canada received 0 seats. This type of governmental organization is going to force some type of collaboration. Otherwise, the alternative is nothing happens and maybe we have another election. In Trudeau's previous administration, he could pass his notions in the House of Commons with ease because he had the majority. Now, he needs a way to get those extra couple votes. Some reporters believe that the NDP is going to hold the balance of power. They align somewhat closely to the Liberals, and their combined seats produce that magic majority. I think there's also another possibility. People are ignoring the Bloc Québécois. These guys actually have more seats in the NDP, and it's quite clear what their agenda is. If you want to win their seats, there's one thing you need to promise them, and that is whatever Quebec is feeling like. If Quebec has certain priorities, certain initiatives, you have to concede to them, and they'll give you the votes, and that might actually be not a bad price to pay to get those 30 plus extra seats on your side. We're not talking extreme measures either. It's not like the Bloc is going to tell Trudeau, hey, Quebec wants to be separate, let us leave the country and we'll give you these votes. No, it's often going to be something more subtle and reasonable. I can already see certain topics being off the table and not available for discussion, like Quebec's controversial religious symbol ban. Trudeau won't be able to touch that if he wants to work with the Bloc. What the NDP would like in return for their collaboration isn't as clear. The Bloc is very open. You can see right through them, it's all about Quebec. With the NDP, their motives might have shifted now. They were talking about the coalition quite heavily, but only in relation to a possibility where the Conservatives win the minority. They did not want Scheer to be the Prime Minister, and they were willing to collaborate based on that front. But now that Trudeau is actually going to be the next Prime Minister, they don't have that same motivation. It's not really about keeping somebody out of power now, but they might shift their sights into repairing their own status. The NDP underperformed. Maybe they don't want to align too closely with Trudeau because them helping Trudeau helps his image. It makes Trudeau very desirable if a lot of good policies get passed with the help of the NDP. The credit is not likely going to flow back to them. They might actually rebel against that and revert to their previous tactic. Before the debates even happened, Jagmeet was very vocal about attacking Trudeau. He was going at him. They weren't buddy-buddy like it was for the past couple of weeks. They wanted to tear each other down because the way this works here, if you're left-leaning, it's a dichotomy. It's either you vote for the Liberal or the NDP. If you're left-leaning, it's unlikely you vote for the Conservative Party, and this creates a vacuum where the votes are juggled between those two parties there and maybe the Green Party. But their voter base isn't that large. It comes down to these two predominantly. I'm not convinced that Trudeau himself even wants to work with the NDP in this given situation, especially given that the Bloc is right there. The NDP is essentially his next biggest competitor for vote getting. They often end up splitting the vote, and a lot of people make a strategic choice between the two. If he makes the NDP appear better, which would happen if they work together, it's a mutually beneficial thing, Trudeau will probably get a lot of the credit, but there would still be some detraction to the NDP, especially if Trudeau's policies shift more to the left, which is what the NDP will probably propose. He would then just be bleeding support away from himself to another competitor. Might not be in the cards for this situation, and that makes this very interesting. The Bloc keeps coming up as this wild card right now. Now, let's move on to the surprises of the night. The first one was actually the NDP. Again, they underperformed. They were polling high after the debates after Jagmeet Singh's performance. He did quite well, but they came back down to earth. Most speculators had them winning the third most seats, but they slipped by a noticeable margin. That could have been due to maybe some last-minute strategic voting, people voting for the Liberals instead because they wanted to ensure that a left-leaning party was in power, or maybe they simply had a change of heart. The Bloc was also a big surprise. The polls predicted this, but to see it in action, it was pretty impressive. They've experienced a mini resurgence, or maybe even a major one. They didn't do too well in previous elections, but now they hold the third most seats in Parliament. I would also say that the Conservatives themselves, their performance was somewhat unexpected. They didn't get as many seats as I thought, but that's not really due to percentage of the vote they earn. The polls had them pretty much neck and neck the entire time, and here's the interesting thing. The poll was actually half correct, you could say. The Liberals earned 33% of the popular vote, compared with 34% for the Conservatives. The Conservatives actually earned more votes than the Liberals in the grand scheme of Canada. More people supported them. The poll was right in that sense. They got 34 and 33% respectively, but when it came down to seat distribution, there is a large disparity. Now, why might that be? It really comes down to how aggregated the votes were. It indicates that the Conservatives had high support in clusters or pockets, while the Liberals had more spread out general support. This matters given our current system, because winning a riding by one vote, or 1 million votes, produces the same outcome. It's still just one seat. The surplus has no bearing on your success as a party. Having a lot of one particular voter in a concentrated area is not really the most beneficial strategy. You'd rather increase your chances across multiple ridings to maximize the amount of seats that you are in play for. The Conservative voters are highly congested in certain areas like Alberta and certain other communities in other areas, but Liberal support was more widespreading. You'd rather have that to increase your chances across multiple ridings, and that's what resulted in this discrepancy here. The Liberals got less of the popular vote, but they got majorly more seats than the Conservatives. Oddly enough, there's actually a situation in which aggregating your votes is a massive benefit to you. This cluster strategy works wonders for parties like the Bloc. They only want votes in a particular set of ridings. This really caps their potential, but they don't care. The Conservatives care because they want to be the Prime Minister. But with the Bloc, it's not their mandate. They don't want to win the election. The Bloc received 8% of the popular vote, and they earned 32 seats. The Green Party, they received 7% of the popular vote, and they only earned 3. If you're setting your sights pretty low and just maximizing your seats while not really trying to go for that upper echelon, so you don't really care about being the Prime Minister or being the top 2, well yeah, the cluster strategy might actually work wonders for you in that situation. Now, this brings into question the idea of electoral reform. I guarantee you, it does not happen with this current government. Trudeau promised it the first time around. It was either out of naivety or deceit because it never materialized. There was definitely a moment of realization there that shifted him away from the concept. There are a lot of approaches to reform, but something like proportional representation is one of the most popular. Under that, it essentially tries to tie how much power you have to the amount of popular votes you received. So in this case, Trudeau would have gotten 32% of the seats, and Scheer would have got 33. There's no way that Trudeau would have advocated for a system like that, where he actively undermines his own party, and he creates a battlefield where the opposition would have actually beat him. It's quite likely that under any of the other electoral reform ideas that the Liberals would have performed much worse as well. It's unlikely that the party in power is going to advocate for a change that worsens them. Earning only a third of the popular vote and winning is a pretty sweet deal. I've also heard chatter about people suggesting that the Conservatives, the Bloc, and the NDP can actually band together and pass an electoral reform bill because together they have enough votes to get that done. But there's one problem. I sincerely doubt it happens because it requires that you enlist the support of the Bloc. Keep in mind, they had 8% of the vote and they got 32 seats. They aren't going to support a motion that will counter their strategic priorities. They like the way it is right now. Very similar to the Liberals, are not going to actively undermine their cause. It's a system that benefits them, and they're not going to join together to ruin themselves. It won't happen. And without their seats, the idea is null. So the final surprise of the night for me was Bernier and the People's Party. Simply put, they got slaughtered, winning 0 seats, and Bernier himself lost to a conservative opponent within his own riding. Your leader got slain, none of these supporters came out, you didn't get any seats. It's going to be tough recovering from that, and I want to see what happens with that party. This could be the nail in the coffin for them, or they could try and rise above from outside, because from within the house, they have basically no support and no influence. Sometimes I have to wonder what these leaders are thinking when they're crafting their strategy. Denying climate change is a losing talking point. In 2019, you can't go out there and add it as a main point in your campaign and expect to win a noticeable amount of seats. It's not going to happen. A lot of people care about this, and that's only one of the reasons why Bernier got done in. He didn't really harness his abilities properly. His advertising was questionable at points. And for me, it was really the climate thing, though. Big X, and that probably turned off a lot of Canadian voters as well. I expect leaders to learn from this, though. Even Scheer can pick up from that. He had a climate plan, but it wasn't the best. I fully expect them to realize this and adapt in the upcoming election in 4 more years. So, in related news, the Conservative Party has a choice coming up right now. People are displeased with Scheer, and they need to change if they want to compete again. I really think his strategy did him in. You need less antics and more policy next time. Nearly 4 in 10 Conservative voters would like a leadership change, according to the CBC. That's not a good sign. When 40% of the people who support your party want a change in leadership, it's quite likely to happen. Now, with Trudeau at the helm for the next 4 years, Canada already has a good sense of what's to come. Similar policy, likely similar scandals, but it's not world-shattering. Trudeau will not single-handedly bring about the apocalypse, especially in this minority government setting. It could actually be a good thing where we see some more centrist policy and some teamwork. That's been sorely lacking in politics for quite some time. Some key challenges I predict that Trudeau will need to navigate during this next term include the cost of living. Houses are insane, wages have stagnated, and people need to find a way out of this. Right now, his big idea with housing is the first-time home buyer incentive, but I'm not completely sold on this, and he wants to ramp it up a little bit more. We'll talk more about this if he does ramp it up, but hopefully he expands into other areas and solutions before we head to that. The next issue that Trudeau is going to have to deal with is probably a looming recession. We've been somewhat overdue for one for quite some time, and there's been some key indicators like the yield curve inverting that are predicting something to happen, at least during his term. If we do encounter a recession though, there's one thing to really keep in mind here, especially when you consider recessions in context with government. It's unlikely that a government can cause a recession. There are a lot of variables in it, and the recession curve is more likely to follow something like the short-term debt cycle. That's in when people who... So first of all, you borrow money to buy things, and eventually you're going to have to start paying that back. There's a certain time period between those 2 points. If you increase your ability to spend now, in the future foreseeably, you reduce it because you got to pay these loans back. When that reduction happens, the economy is going to suffer because less money is being spent. Traditionally, how you ramp it back up is you lower interest rates, but now, interest rates are already so low, they don't really have that option. Maybe they go into negative interest rates, they pay you to borrow money, but I digress. This pattern over here is more correlated to a recession occurring than things the government does, and companies are at play too, and banks and whatnot. A government can cause a recession theoretically if they really mess up their policy, but that's hard to do unless they really want to destroy the country. There is one thing that's likely to happen though, and that is governments not fixing the issue swiftly enough or making it worse, and that's a clear distinction. The recession happening is going to happen. It would occur if you had Trudeau, Scheer, Jagmeet, May, anyone in power. What really matters is how they handle it and how they bring Canada out. They need a strategy to mitigate damage and ensure that we can recover when the time comes for it. That's going to be a major test for Trudeau, and hopefully his economic advisors are ready to deal with that. And finally, the third major thing Trudeau is going to have to deal with is the escalating tensions with China. Canada already got slapped pretty hard with some of their consequences for dealing with the CFO of Huawei, and given China's current climate, they're dealing with a lot of pressure from global powers now. America has the trade war going on. A lot of major corporations are being put in a peculiar situation. They have to choose between the Chinese market and the American one, as consumers are protesting them because they don't want to see anyone kowtowing to China, especially in relation to Hong Kong. And there you have it, the other point. China has their hands full internally dealing with things like Hong Kong and the accusations of them harvesting organs from minority religious groups. China's not in a good position right now, and it's actually a prime opportunity for global powers to band together and try and do something to restrain them. They've been marching to the beat of their own drum for quite some time, but it's never been this prevalent in the news before. People are talking about it, and they want to do something. If Trudeau can navigate a successful partnership with the likes of America and Europe to bring China in check, I think the golden opportunity is going to occur within his term. After that, after the Hong Kong thing blows over, I think it'll be too late. China will have established a firm stronghold, and internally, opposition will be silenced. Hong Kong is like the last frontier of people who actually want democracy. The mainland is somewhat opposed to it, but it's different when someone internally tells you it's a good idea versus those Westerners from across the world. Once that light extinguishes, we could be looking at some dark times, so hopefully Trudeau can navigate that as well. Now my final point is, regardless if you love or you hate him, he's going to be running Canada for quite some time. Because it's a minority government, maybe it's only 1 or 2 years if they vote again, but he's still the Prime Minister, and we have to hope for him to do the best he can. I wish him good luck. These are the issues, and I'll be here to criticize and give him recommendations along the way. So, that brings me to the end of my conversation today. If you enjoy the content, be sure to share and review. You can also find me on Twitter at Perri Platform. I'll see you soon.